Welcome to The Next Moves. My name's Joe Diubaldo, and for the past 25 years, I've been helping people build careers and build amazing companies. And the truth I've learned is that we all get stuck at different times. And I want to help you get unstuck, plan your next move, and the move after that. And I think the best way to do that is to look at the choices that some of our guests had in front of them and the moves that they made. Let's take a listen. So welcome to The Next Moves. I have a friend of mine on who I've known for many, many years. His name is Cyriac Alappat, and I worked together starting in 2013, 2014.
Yeah, around that time.
And you've built this interesting career. And I think that you're someone that when I look at the purpose of what I'm doing, when I'm trying to run these, it's really to look at what options did people have in front of them and what moves did they make? And that's both when you're trying to build companies and when you're trying to build a successful career. So I like to look at this from the starting point of the origin story, for lack of a better term, of like, walk us through your career, specifically though, starting where you are now. Start with where you are now and tell us what you do, and then take us backwards to where you started.
So thanks for having me on, Joe. Excited to kind of tell my story, and hopefully I can share some learnings to anybody who's listening in. So I'm Cyriac. I'm a principal at Cross Border Ventures. So we are an impact venture fund. So what we mean by that really is we focus on the same sort of return profile for health tech deals as any kind of biotech or healthcare fund. But we're also an impact fund, which is a little different in the sense that we also look for commercializing life-saving innovations in developing markets. And one of the reasons why we have this impact thesis is we spun out of a global health funder called Grand Challenges Canada. Not a lot of Canadians know about this NGO, but there are several Grand Challenges. The first one initially started by the Gates Foundation, with the concept of working on grand challenges like cure malaria, cure or reduce maternal mortality significantly in developing markets. And so there were several grand challenges programs that were opened up or were initiated globally. The largest is actually in Canada. And as of today, Global Affairs Canada, which is the foreign affairs arm of Canada, essentially manages that program and provides money. And one of the lessons they learned by providing grants to the global health ecosystem was it was not good enough to just provide grants to innovations. Sometimes you want to have a board seat and provide and actually invest equity so that you could actually really change the trajectory of commercializing these companies at an early stage, venture-backed stage.
Okay. So you find yourself here now, and effectively you're in a VC, correct?
It is a VC. I would say the difference is we do look at, as I mentioned, the same kind of return profiles, but we also look at impact. So the way we measure impact is lives accessed, lives improved, and lives saved for each innovation that we invest in. And those numbers are measured in developing markets.
Okay. So walk me through the work that you do from the lens of these are the skills that I need to do this job.
Yeah, so being one of the first employees, and I guess the management almost calls me a founder of the fund. One of the founders of the funds, I should say, is that you had to have a very, very a various skill sets, at least at the beginning, because we were setting up the actual financial instrument that is now cross-border. But as when I look at today's role is very much focused on investments, predominantly because we've grown the team now and now we're allocating. So an average kind of day for me is looking at pipelines, doing the deal meetings, and then potentially starting to evaluate companies financially, also using technology assessment, and then also doing our impact assessment. The second component of my job is growing the network at Cross Border Ventures. So we have a pretty good scientific advisory board, but we expand on those board memberships as the VC continues to grow.
So if we were to take a look at this, you've had a journey now that's taking you from public accounting through to recruitment, through to a startup that you tried to found yourself and you got going, and then into this organization, Grand Challenges, before now launching the Cross Border Impact Fund.
Yes.
So how does someone how does someone start here and end up where you are? Like what happened? And I'm assuming that there were some pretty, I call them the desperate choices, which are like, I don't know if I want to do this, but I feel like I need to do something. So talk to me how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe. I mean, first maybe I'll go even before university. Even though I grew up in Canada for most of my childhood, I did my high schooling in Dubai and was able to actually travel to many markets that we now serve, which is India and sub-Saharan Africa, and so really got a taste of just understanding some of the nuances of operating in these markets. And that really kind of gave me a global kind of view versus just a kind of Canadian or US centric view, knowing that these markets are very large markets. But that's not how I started my career. I started my career as a CPA. I graduated from Laurier University. A little bit of following my father's footsteps. So he was a CPA. He was in accounting, and then he moved on to being kind of in more of in like a CFO role. And so that's kind of initially how I got into this. I always had an uh, real interest in medicine. I was even thinking of going into pre-med, but for whatever reason, it didn't work out. But one of the great things about EY is, which is relevant for my work today, is you walk into a client's office, you do the audit. So basically, doing due diligence on the company. You get comfortable asking for documents that are might be more confidential or have some sort of I would say requirements to them that you understand how to do due diligence. And so I think that's the key lesson I learned in auditing. And I was able to take that skill set and move it into cross border. But one of the things that I did not really have is an understanding of startups and even just how technology evolves. And that's kind of how I got to work with Clarity and obviously yourself. And in that role, I had some exposure to developing the Lumify platform, but I think the real work was actually growing a lot of the network. So doing the recruitment, doing a little bit of BD, and that really taught me a lot about how to grow a network, which is something I do at Cross Border Ventures. And then at that point, I started to think about launching my own venture fund, which is interesting. That's kind of a blend of finance, but also being able to grow your own network. And so I essentially founded a accelerator, or I should say, kind of and with the idea that we would kind of put a $10 million venture fund as part of that package. But we quickly learned that it's difficult to raise a venture fund. We went to the final stages of getting investment from a sovereign wealth fund through some of my brother's contacts. He was an investment banker in the Middle East. And they pretty much told us, you have no track record, and I don't think you should be doing this. So at that point, interesting
And you're
enough,
like, right, okay.
I'll take that feedback into consideration. Thank you.
So don't do this then.
Yeah,
Check.
yeah. But the idea back then was bringing startups from Canada to the Middle East, where the sovereign wealth fund had an interest in bringing innovations into their market. And kind of dovetail the work that we're doing across border, which is bringing innovations into different markets, but specifically focused on healthcare. But I think that was really good learnings. And one of the interesting, you never know when you start these things how it can spinball into something else. And so we had an advisor. Her name was Annie Terrio. So she was actually looking to start her own venture fund, which was in the impact space, and she had a lot more experience than myself. And what was interesting between cross border and the fund that I tried to form, one of the things is we had very little institutional backing. And so when Annie had kind of come to me about this thesis she was working very closely with Grand Challenges Canada and was joining as their chief investment officer. And so that really brought a lot of credibility to the fundraising of cross border. And as of today, it took us about 2 years to raise our fund, but as of today, we're about a $90 million USD fund. We are a Series B investor, so typically commercial stage entities. And a lot of that, I would say, is the initial, like a lot of our success has been from the initial backing and incubation of Grand Challenges Canada that provided us a lot of credibility.
So being asked a question like, how do you find yourself where you are now? I think we try to fit our story to what we know currently. But you were in a place where someone said you had no business or shouldn't be doing this because you don't have a track record. And now you're doing this with a team. I want to take you back to that moment when you had to make a decision. And do you did you have an option to keep going and trying to raise the capital, or was it really done? And how do you move forward from that point to where you are?
That's a great question, Joe. I tell people that I have an exit. It's minus 50,000.
Okay.
Uh, and so, I think the number one question on how to end a business is looking at your bank account, do it linked to $0, and saying, I got to get a job at this point. But other than that, critical piece. I think one of the most, when we kind of were at the end stages, we had a couple of collaborators with us,
Yeah.
and they had more track record than I did. And those collaborators are moving out, and they said, like there's only a certain time frame in which we could potentially work on this, and at that point we need to move on as well. So I think it was at a point where both myself, my brother who was also a co-founder, and our collaborators were like, this probably is not going to work. But interesting enough, that whole journey really dovetailed to this new role, because Annie, who is our advisor, she learned, like, we went and built all the kind of prospectus documents, the offering of memorandum, all the legal documents that were required for a venture fund. And she was actually part of that, and we actually rolled some of that documentation, or at least the templates and some of the thinking, to the new fund. So it was interesting, even from like that level of granular work. It actually, there's always some sort of overlap if you're lucky enough to move into a role that's like in a similar space. And then the second thing is I learned a lot about how to get deal flow. Because as part of raising a venture fund, you need to show that you have deal flow. These are the 3 or 4 investments you're going to make. Build out the investment thesis. Do a bit of financial modeling. Just really build a snapshot of why these investments can make money and potentially fit your thesis. And a lot of that work actually rolled into cross border as well. So in some ways, yeah, it was heartbreaking to stop your own business, but in other ways, I think it was much more formative in terms of experience.
There's always the line that the end product is you, because you're building a set of competencies that you can use in the future. So if you think about it, the skepticism that comes from being in public accounting, the ability to approach senior people and ask for information that other people would feel uncomfortable doing when you're in audit, and then moving that into an understanding of, okay, I understand the domain of finance and I'm going to become a recruiter, and I'm going to become someone who sits and looks at technology on how to accelerate recruitment and improve decisions. So you're actually leveraging the finance background, you're building the network next, and you're learning how tech can be implemented and change the way businesses work. And then using that to try to start your own, and using what you learn while you're starting your own fund to support the launch of another one, because you met the individual that you could partner with in the future. So there's always the idea of how do you connect these things, but I always look at it from like, what skills are built each time and what do you move forward with? I find that quite interesting.
Just one point to say, if it wasn't for my prior experiences, I really don't think I would be in this role. So I 100% agree to what you're saying.
Well, there's the path that gets you there. And there's also like the path as you're walking in life, you see, I always think that forward momentum creates opportunities. And if you're not moving forward and trying things, then you're just stuck where you are and opportunity doesn't show up. But if you're actually, okay, I'm going to try this next, you at least have a chance of uncovering significant opportunity like you did. So there's an idea right now, and that venture is really, really hard. And the business model is in many ways for venture funds dramatically changed. So can you comment on what it's like now relative to what it was before?
Yeah, I definitely think the venture market, especially in Canada, has matured There are multiple players. I think in the early days, actually, the government of Canada actually provided a lot of like levered financing as well to stimulate venture capital. And so, some of the larger venture funds you see today are really beneficiaries of that program. It's called the VCAP program. I think fast forward to 2024, or in our case, raising in 2022, you really need to have a differentiated thesis in terms of raising for venture funds. Almost everybody will say they raise entirely on returns, and they do technical analysis, and they're like they kind of do like the MBA type analysis.
Yep.
Highly unlikely you'll be able to get a fund size that's like over 10 to 15 million if you're like a first time fund manager to do that. And I see fund managers who do that. I think where the real difficulty is when you start raising more than like $100 million, which is like a medium sized venture fund. You really need to have a differentiated thesis. So in our case, we're focused on women and children's health, which is kind of considered an underserved medical market. The second thing is we are also an impact fund, which is kind of the thesis of Grand Challenges Canada, etc. And that attracted a lot of global health funders who are our LPs as of today. And even there's a pharmaceutical company, so J&J is also there. So we also had a thesis around bringing products into developing markets, which are considered underserved, and have the credibility to say that we could do this because I was a former investment manager at Grand Challenges. We've done this work before. And so in terms of global health and kind of technology transfer, we're about the third fund in this space that's doing this work. And just to give you an idea, the investors in our fund, some of them are invested in the other global health funds. So it's a small community, but I think will be a growing community going forward. And I think the measure of success for cross borders, if there's not just one fund like us, and we get big, there's probably multiple funds in this space.
So when you say there's three funds, you're talking about three funds globally or three funds in Canada?
No, three funds globally that work on the type of investments we do, in the sense of bringing technologies from high income markets into developing markets.
Yep.
There's about three of them that do it so far.
So talk to me about what's in the fund.
In terms of portfolio, do you mean?
Yeah. Are you able to discuss them?
Yeah, we could definitely discuss them. So as of now, we're about 90% allocated. For the life cycle of this fund, we'll probably do 10 investments. So we're very close to closing our ninth investment. And we'll likely do one more investment for probably Q1 next year, and start looking to raise our second fund probably around Q4 next year. And so, in terms of kind of the portfolio at this point, it's almost completed. I would say a lot of the portfolios weighted towards maternal health, which is, if you think about it in terms of dual market, what the developing markets needs are. There's a huge disparity in maternal mortality in these countries. And so there's actually a lot of financing in terms of like health ministry priorities that go into this particular health vertical. So we tend to stick to the health verticals that can potentially commercialize in these markets. And so, for example, we've invested in a company in San Francisco. It's called Radiant Oximetry. So they have produced essentially a FDA approved device called the Daisy. And the Daisy is a cervical drain for C-sections when there's postpartum hemorrhage, which, in developing markets, C-section rates are increasing right now. There are various tools for postpartum hemorrhage. None of them work like really well. It's a very complicated issue to solve, and it's a very critical health crisis if that does appear in the patient. But C-sections are an area now that is increasing, and postpartum hemorrhage for C-section is a lot more nuanced. And so this device is actually used as a cervical drain. And so one of the reasons why we did that investment is, in India, for example, about 35% of the women now get C-sections. And
Okay.
so, these are large markets, and they're underserved as well. The other investments we've made, so we made one investment in a company called Pendulum. So they are essentially a supply chain demand like modeling AI company. What really interested us in the beginning is, this company has more of what we call reverse technology transfer. So, they're based in the U.S., but most of their contracts are with ministries in sub-Saharan Africa and a lot of the global health funders, where they work a lot around health, supply chain in contraception, around basic medical supplies, because so much of the supply chain in these countries is critical for health management. And if you don't have a robust supply chain, you're not getting the materials or the pharmaceuticals to the people who need it. And so that's one of the reasons why we invest in that company. And maybe just I'll give you a third one, which is and it gives you an idea of kind of the flavor of companies we invest in. So there's a company called OncoLens. They're a virtual tumor board company focused on oncology. So what they do essentially is they're a digital multidisciplinary tumor board in which multiple specialists can discuss cancer treatments for patients that have failed standard treatment regimes. And so usually, during pre-COVID, this used to happen in the office, in the hospital, where you have the radiologist, the cardiologist, the immunologist all come together to figure out a treatment regime for a patient. And now, after COVID, this all became online. And so one of the things that we're really interested in working with them, because their business is predominantly in the US, is how do we talk about technology transfer and physician education in developing markets by connecting the developing market institutions. So in this case, we're running a trial for pediatric oncology in Mexico, where they'll be discussing their patient profiles or patient treatment pathways with the Phoenix Children's Cancer Center in Arizona. And a lot of the discussions, it's really interesting to get the insights out of this, is around how do we use the new agents and therapeutics in our market effectively to improve treatment profiles. And so this is like an example of physician upskill, not just kind of bringing a new technology into the market.
So that's, and I guess what I'm grasping at is that a technology play? Is that a learning platform? What is it that creates? As an uninformed person, I'm thinking about like, okay, a virtual board, tumor board that would be looking at this and saying, what's failed, what interventions are available, what should we come up with? And then the second part of that is developing the capability of people locally to deliver that. Is that what it is?
So the way it works, the OncoLens platform actually, in essence, is kind of almost like a conversation we're having right now, but then they're also tied into the EHR systems, the electronic health record systems. Also, keep in mind, you can't have Zoom conversations about patients. There's confidentiality, and there's a lot of rules around that. So they're kind of HIPAA compliant and all those other things. But then they also tie into a lot of the essentially the regulatory bodies on how to prescribe these treatments on a per country basis. And then there's good like treatment follow-ups where you can log your notes and everything. So that's their standard business. There is a whole AI component to their business. So,
Okay.
because they have multiple, they do thousands of tumor boards on their platform every day. You start getting real world evidence on how oncologists are prescribing medication to their patients. And these are typically transcribed into kind of their ML algorithm, and you essentially get insights into how these medications are used. And that's very useful for pharmaceutical companies. The second thing, because pharmaceutical companies are under a lot of pressure now to measure the real world data on how their drugs are used in market.
Mm-hmm.
The second component is clinical trial matching, which is extremely important for pharmaceutical companies because they're always looking to recruit patients that are fit certain inclusion and exclusion criteria. And these patients that are discussed on the platform you're able to identify the ones that are fits for clinical trials. But the more important use case around the impact use case, so I'm going to use this Mexico pediatric oncology initiative as an example. The discussions on the platform will be transcribed into reports that the health ministry will start to understand where are the challenges in pediatric oncology in terms of the care pathway, and how are our doctors responding to it, and what are the medications that they need on the ground level.
Okay. I think there's something that everyone at one point wanted to be a VC. And I think that there's an idea of what it is versus what it really is. And you and I were talking the other day, and literally people come to you with ideas looking for funding. And from the idea stage, here's what I'd like to do. And I'm giving you an idea for my company. You then go through a whole series of validations in terms of proving it out and understand, like, how does that happen? Like, someone comes to you, how do they get in your door? And then what do you do with that if it looks interesting? Because you can't allocate capital against something that is flawed, but you might not know. So give me that chain of what you do next.
Yeah, yeah. So first, in terms of like pipeline, so we built kind of a good funnel at Cross Border at this point. So we do get, and it's kind of similar to recruiting. You do get like some inbound, deals that hit your desk, and those are, I would say probably maybe 30-40% of kind of the deals that we look at. I would say the majority of deals we look at are either through VC referral networks or conferences. So our teams travel all the time around, really around Europe and North America, going to healthcare conferences, women's health conferences, etc., and really looking at deals that are of interest to us. And then, given that we're now almost 2 years into doing this, some of these deals come back. You might pass on them 2 years ago. They made a lot of progress. They come back. And so our CRM is, we're constantly kind of updating, and then also just resurfacing deals now that we haven't looked at in the past. So I would say, those are kind of, in terms of like pipeline, I think that, that's kind of how we would operate. In terms of due diligence, keep in mind we are in healthcare, so it's a highly regulated industry. And we typically focus on deals that are commercial, which means they have regulatory approval, and and they also have clinical evidence to back that. A lot of that clinical evidence in terms of vetting, because I'm not a medical professional by any means. I work very closely with our scientific advisory board, to do that due diligence. And there's really two pieces of due diligence. First is there a return profile, a return case to be made in North America and Europe? And then second, is there a developing market application? Because what you don't want to do is you do not want to bring an innovation into a market that just leads to excess cost and instability, more complication for the patient. I don't think it does anybody any good. And so, it's really finding the right deals that are what we would call like transformative versus incremental. Because what we find in these healthcare systems, and really, like more lower income, or I should say more like lower income countries, like in sub-Saharan Africa, they're looking for transformative change. They're not really interested in incremental changes that cost $100,000 to extend the patient's life by 30 days. That's not going to do anybody any good. And so it's really finding the companies that are really transferable in terms of like that thesis.
Got it. Okay. So let's take you back in time and let's talk about recruitment. So,
Where you were my boss, by the way.
where I was your boss, how bad was that for you? I hope it was okay.
No, it was good. It was good, Joe.
So, talk to me about how you come in and how you leave. Like, what happens to you? I mean, the idea is simple to say there's the ability to build a network, but there's almost a series of gates you get through where you become better at certain things. So, how did that set you up for this role?
I essentially had got my CPA designation, and I was working at Ernst and Young. I kind of realized it wasn't for me in terms of like long-term career objectives. I was really fascinated by the technology space, and so my initial thinking was maybe to join a technology company, perhaps as in the as an accountant, and then perhaps move more into an operational role. And so I actually walked into Clarity as a candidate. I think that's where I met you at the time, Joe. And then you talked to really about kind of Clarity's mission, which is not just kind of recruitment, but bringing technologies that can be levered to improve the recruitment process. And in some ways, Clarity at that time was almost like it was essentially a technology startup. I think at that time, we probably had 7, 8 staff. And so I really saw a opportunity not to leverage my CPA strengths, in the sense that I understood the industry and I could potentially help on the candidate recruitment side, but then also be able to help operationalize the technology, Lumify. And so I was involved in that. And so I think the lessons learned there really was to not just work with the technology, but to see a company through its growth trajectory, to really understand that to be part of essentially a company that is able to grow, and all the difficulties and opportunities that come with that. And then the second component I would say is really building out the network, but also building your BD skills. As an accountant, you don't really pick up the phone and call people, but as a recruiter, you must, and really be you have a real focus on growing your network, which eventually will give you candidates, and in my case now it gives us deals, and more implementation partners and those kind of things. So those are really the great lessons that I learned at Clarity.
I always wonder though, when you look back, where were you stuck? And where did you feel the most trapped? And how did you take that next move or make the next move?
Yeah, I would say where I felt probably the most lost was at EY, because I quickly realized, going to become a partner and doing audit wasn't really for me. And I took a different trajectory. I think of some of my colleagues from EY. Sometimes I talk to them and they're like, "Wow, you took a completely different trajectory to where you were." But then I also look back and say that experience was very formative, because I'm in the financial industry. I do due diligence on companies, and so maybe at that time I didn't think that the you know, experience was going to be as relevant to my career. But now when I look back at it, it's quite formative.
You have an appreciation for it. So the idea of walking away from that with a father who's a CPA and a CFO, how was that? Like, what was that conversation like?
Well, the funny thing was, my dad also tried to get into pre med and decided not to. So he had some understanding. I don't know. It's kind of interesting how it like goes in same cycles, even though we're not like it wasn't like connected by any means. So he understood. He was very supportive, to be honest. I think his initial thinking is Cyriac's gonna focus on what he wants to do. He's fairly young in his career at the time when I thought I wanted to walk away from EY. He did have some questions on me joining Clarity, but I think at the overall he was quite happy I did.
There's always the idea that our parents are in the background evaluating what choices we make, and with them having the best of intentions, I think most of the time, which is pick something that you're going to be successful in and happy in and try to find the intersection of that. So I would guess recruitment would have sounded quite foreign to him at that moment in time.
Yes, yeah, but I think as things have evolved in cross border, I think they themselves, but also I do too. I think that the experience at Clarity was also quite formative in the work I do today.
So I've had your brother on this, and he has been someone been quite enlightening to talk to about AI.
Right.
And I know that he supports you in the fund. Like, what kind of work are you doing, or what kind of work are you doing to leverage AI?
That's a great question. So a lot of the deals we see, almost like 90% of them, if it's not just like a med device, has some sort of AI component to it now. And so, one of the things that we are leveraging Abraham, my brother, for is really just popping the hood of these AI companies and making sure that what they're saying in their deck and what they're claiming to be is true is actually possible. I would say the companies that we do a lot of due diligence. So we typically invest in companies that have a good syndicate, so they have some sort of like VC backing, and there's been some due diligence done on them. Where it can go a bit, where we do a lot of work is they make claims on platform plays. So sometimes they'll go through a regulatory process for a certain indication or like a prediction on let's just say heart failure or something like that. But they'll make claims that they're able to use this same AI model to expand into other indications. That needs a lot of work because a lot of them, the enterprise value of the business, the valuation of the business is sometimes based on this assumption of platforms, and that needs to be checked. And often in times when we talk about the field of AI, it's really evolving. And we're just now building the frameworks to actually assess it. And that's something we do with Abe, my brother, as well, is to kind of build the frameworks to assess these technologies. And I don't think a lot of VC funds are doing it now, but they will be doing it soon. There's been some, early movers that are really taken off on the AI field, and they'll hire PhDs and things like that. In our case, we're not going to be the specialists at AI, but we do want to have an understanding. We do want to have a framework and thesis around this.
Is there anything that you want to add that we haven't talked about?
I would just say, the lessons that I've learned at Grand Challenges and Cross Border is Canada is a respected country in global health. I don't think a lot of Canadians, maybe Canadians are not too aware of those things. But this country and the innovations that come out of this country have been very meaningful. And I hope that Canada as a community, the VC community, can come together and continue this type of tradition of bringing life-saving technologies into developing markets. And I think it's a very worthy cause.
So do I. Well said. Thank you. This has been awesome to learn about what you're doing now and how you got here.
Appreciate it, Joe. Thank you so much.